I am Bob Lingle, and this is the Good Neighbor podcast. This is a place where I connect with authors and the community. We use this time to discuss life, sometimes death, but always books. I hope you enjoy our conversation today, and I hope you get something out of it. The world is a pretty confusing place right now, so let's do our best to be good neighbors. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our guest tonight is an award-winning entertainer, author, and speaker. Young music fans may be more familiar with his persona as beloved kid rocker Mr. Stinky Feet. Over the past 23 years, he has performed more than 4,500 high-energy shows throughout North America and Europe, and twice at the White House. His 9 family albums have earned an impressive collection of national parenting awards. His YouTube channel has more than 2.5 million views. In 2020, his music was streamed more than 1 million times on Spotify alone. But tonight, we will be talking about his latest work, which is a departure from that. Ripple, A Long Strange Search for a Killer. To everyone joining us, I present to you Jim Cosgrove.
Hello.
Thank you, Bob. For joining us tonight, Jim.
Yeah, you bet.
And you had mentioned before, just after this, you are going to be performing at an elementary school. So
that's right.
Time in mind for our discussion.
Yes, I am coming to you from an elementary school in Plattsburgh, Missouri.
Nice.
And I have a show here this evening. Yeah.
That's great. So your book, Ripple, A Long Strange Search for a Killer, I always try to read the book as close to the interview so it's fresh in my mind. So I actually just finished it a couple of hours ago.
Oh, fabulous.
I skimmed it months ago to make sure it was a good fit for us. And of course it was, because you're here.
Excellent. Thank you.
But I really love the book. So this is a story about a murder that happened 40 years ago. Correct. And it became a 26-year-long project for you. And I ran a marathon a couple of years ago, which is 26.2 miles. So if you had a mile for every year you worked on this project, this book is a marathon. So congratulations.
So, can I now claim to be a marathon runner?
Yes. Add a 26.2 sticker onto the back of your vehicle.
Good. I think I'm going to do that. That's great. Thank you. So, yes, it's been indeed a long, strange trip, and really a labor of love for all those years.
Yeah. And as an elevator pitch for somebody who doesn't know anything about this book, what is Ripple about, and what first inspired you to explore this story?
Yeah. So this is the story about the disappearance of Frank McGonigle, who was a family friend of mine. We grew up together in the same neighborhood in Kansas City, and we were their family and my family were just two of scores of Irish Catholic families in our neighborhood, very large, loud families. And Frank disappeared from his home in Kansas City in 1982, and his family never heard from him again. And they spent 9 years looking for him. And about 5 days after he left home, the sheriff and coroner in a small town on the southern coast of South Carolina, down the South Carolina Low Country, found an unidentified body. And they spent 9 years trying to figure out who this body was. And with the help of a detective from Kansas City, they found that it was indeed Frank. But there was little known about his death. There were he had been murdered. He had been shot. They had a couple of suspects, a couple of kids in town that everybody kind of thought did it, but never had enough evidence to pin it on him. I came on the story in 1995. I was looking for a subject for my master's thesis. I was writing for the Albuquerque Journal in New Mexico and decided to go back to school and get a master's in creative writing, creative nonfiction writing. And I asked the family if I could tell their story about their journey to find their son and their brother, Frank. I had intended to stay out of the story. Mm-hmm. My intention as a good journalist was to let them just tell their story and to stay out of it. But as you found out, as the readers will find out, I got sucked into the story head first, and I became part of the story.
And 26 years, you had started it in 1995 as your master's thesis. What kept bringing you back to this story? Because obviously this isn't your master's thesis. A good
No.
chunk of it is,
Yes.
or the research behind it. But
Right.
what brought you back to the story? Because you revisited the area a couple of times, and finally in 2018 you made one last trip there.
I did. Yes. So I, I wrote it as my master's thesis, submitted it, graduated. Frank's mother had asked me not to publish anything publicly about it. She said, use it for your master's thesis. And of course, it was in the archives at the University of New Mexico, where anybody could get it if they wanted to, but not very accessible.
Yeah.
And she just asked me not to publish it. And so I honored her request and did not. But then several years later, I ran into her at an Easter brunch with my mother. My mother and her were friends. And she pulled me aside and she said, I've been thinking about it, Jim. If you want to publish this story, go for it. I give you my blessing. And at the time, I was had just been married a couple of years. We had a child on the way. There were other things going on in my life. Mm-hmm. So I didn't get on it right away, but I continued to tell the story. And I actually relished in telling the story because I'm a storyteller. Yeah. So I would tell the story at family gatherings and to friends over meals. And over the years, people kept encouraging me to finally get back and write it, and finish writing it. So with the help of prodding from a couple of my nieces, I decided it was time. So yeah, in the spring of, I believe it was 2019, my brother and one of Frank's brothers traveled back to South Carolina just to kind of tie up some loose ends, mm-hmm. Interview some of the people I had interviewed, 20 some years prior, and to maybe come up with see if we can find something new about the case. And it was in itself a very interesting trip. So then when the lockdown came with COVID, I had no excuses but to sit down and write.
That's great. And how was the completed book different from the manuscript, other than the addition with the final visits? What were the differences between the manuscript or your master's thesis and the completed book?
Well, my master's thesis focused mostly on the family. It was mostly on the McGonigle family and how they dealt with Frank's disappearance. So for 9 years, they looked for their brother. And so Frank was known as kind of he was a deadhead, fan of the Grateful Dead. He would tour, run and follow the Dead. He would take off on road trips every now and then just to go camping. He loved outdoors. So the fact that he took off at the age of 26 from home, he was living at home at the time, was not a surprise to his family or and many people who knew him. They didn't think much of it, thought, well, he's just out on the road for a few days. But he always called and told his mother where he was. But this time he didn't. So they naturally got concerned. So they spent 9 years looking for him. And I thought, man, that's a lot of time, a lot of anguish. I come from a large family. So there are 8. I'm the baby of 8. And Frank is in the middle of 9. And so I know what it's like to be in a big family. And when he disappeared, it was like a cousin of mine had disappeared or something, So I and they had a lot of guilt, they had a lot of anguish, a lot of grief. And I wanted to kind of explore that in a kind of a family relation sort of way. So that was primarily what my thesis was about. And then I added, so the book now includes my side of the trip when I went down there in 1995 initially, and then the follow-up trip that we made in 2019.
You had talked a lot about family, and one of my next questions was going to be that this book is a lot about a lot of things, and family is a big part of it.
Yes.
I connected with the McGonigle's teasing nature. I liked that exploration of that aspect because I am not from a huge family, but I'm the youngest of 3. And we were a teasing, sarcastic family. We still are. But when you're the youngest, it just kind of hits you a bit differently because you're in a lower stature.
Right.
And so I definitely connected with Frank. Wasn't the youngest, but being in the middle of a good chunk,
Right.
he was younger than most.
Well, and you may appreciate this. Frank was sensitive,
Hmm.
and he was definitely the most sensitive of his siblings. So they were a very loud, uh, big Irish Catholic family who they very opinionated, very a lot of teasing, lots of wrestling, and he was more of a gentle spirit, and he didn't, or he struggled to find his place in the family. Like he didn't quite know, what his place was. He looked at his older brother, who was tough and would kind of beat up on him, and that wasn't him. His dad was a butcher, owned one of the most famous meat market in Kansas City for their family ran it for 70 years, and he had thick forearms, and he was a big guy, and he
Hmm.
and sweet as can be, but that may also not have been Frank's. It definitely was not his personality. So yeah, when you're in a family where there's a lot of teasing and ribbing, and you may not know how it affects some people. And that,
Hmm.
of course, intrigued me as coming from a big family as well.
And because this project, I can relate with you of taking a very long time on a writing project. Like there was a
Yes.
screenplay that I finished that took me about a decade to finish, and had to continuously change. It was a fiction piece, but like technology, everything changed. But for
Yeah.
you, approaching this from a personal aspect and just growing as a person, how did that change and how did that affect the editing process of you're starting this off in your 20s and then
Right.
26 years go by? How much does that impact, and how did this project change you as a person, and how did you as a
Yes.
person end up affecting the finished product?
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Absolutely. I mean, I am a different person than I was when I started this project. And, well, for one, now, I'm a father, and I wasn't then.
Mhm.
Um, I've really a couple of things that surprised me. One of the themes that hit me hard on this, or really in a pleasantly surprising way, was I ended in a place of real compassion, and I think that is an indication of how I've grown as a human, but and as a father. I a lot of people wanted, they wanted answers, and they wanted, somebody needs to serve time for this, and someone needs to be responsible, and I ended at a place of real compassion, not only for Frank and his family, but even for the alleged perpetrators of this crime. And that is a bit different than I think a lot of true crime readers are used to. And in fact, it was difficult for me to have this classified as a true crime, even though it is a true crime
Mhm.
book. It is more of a memoir, but definitely follows this case. So I have evolved that way. I think, certainly become a lot more compassionate, um, and just, I don't know. I'm just older. I don't know if I'm any wiser, but but certainly older.
And going back to the beginning of the project, what was that experience like when you got into your mind of this is what I would like to explore for my master's thesis, approaching the family? That had to be a tough conversation.
Yes, indeed. My mother is the one who kind of bridged the gap for me. She kind of filled in some of the some of my memory, because when I was in high school when he disappeared, and
Mhm.
then I left. I went to college. I got a job. I moved on, and so it was many years later that I came back to it. It was 13 years later, I guess, and she had to kind of fill me in on, like, it was kind of sketchy, like whatever happened with that. I remember when he disappeared. I remember us, kind of looking for him, and um, so she helped me and said, hey, you should approach the family. And I'm like, yeah, sure, great. So I went to them. I hadn't seen the McGonigles in years. They knew me as Tom's little brother. Tom, my older brother, was one of their adopted brothers. He was at their house all the time. They knew him well, and they only knew me kind of through my brother. So I had to kind of reacquaint myself with them and impress upon them that I was serious about this, and this was something that I wanted to go into earnestly and compassionately and tell their story. And they opened up. They were great. And then they, of course, contacted the siblings, and each one of the siblings sat down with me. And had it not been for their vulnerability, willingness to expose their souls, this wouldn't be the book that it is. That's for sure. So I feel real fortunate that they were so open.
Was really interested to learn that approach, just because with reading the book, I had to keep reminding myself that for 9 years, 13 years, it was just them dealing with this as a family. Yeah. And you really do go into the story, like you as an author are fully immersed into the story. That I think it's important to remember as you're reading it, that you weren't a part of that first leg of the journey.
No. And they certainly were open about it, and they talked about it. There was some media coverage, of course, early on. And when they found Frank's body, they had a memorial service back in Kansas City. He was buried in South Carolina, and so they kept him there at the coroner there decided that they needed to just bury him. He had an unmarked. Well, it was just the John Doe grave, and the family then put a proper marker on his grave, but they decided to keep him there. But they had a memorial for him back in Kansas City many years later. And again, there was some media coverage around that. But yeah, that intrigued me. That just that process, Mrs. McGonigle, his mother, wrapped presents for him every year at Christmas and put him under the tree just in case he came back for Christmas, and that there would be something for him under the tree. Yeah.
Before we shift gears in a moment, I just want to put out for anyone watching, if you have any questions or comments, you can use the comment feature on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, and we will incorporate those if we can. It's in the description of the book, but I still was taken aback and was surprised how much it was incorporated into the book of the paranormal, mystic, energy reading aspect of the book. Obviously, that had to have come as a surprise to you. Just kind of introduce what I'm talking about.
Yes. So, being trained as a journalist, again, I was to stay out of the story, right? So, I went to Georgetown, South Carolina, which is the county seat of Georgetown County, in February of '95. It was off season, so there was, not a lot of tourists, and I stayed in a bed and breakfast. I was there. I kind of worked out of this bed and breakfast, and the sheriff gave me access to records. There wasn't much of a file on this case, but gave me access. The coroner, who was one of the sweetest, most gentle humans I've ever met, he was great to work with. He stepped me through it, exactly what happened. He kept detailed notes of what happened. It was remarkable. And I was staying at this bed and breakfast by myself. I had the run of the place myself. It was kind of nice, just the owner and me. And, but I'd been there for a few days, and I got the feeling during my first few days that, everybody in town seemed to think that this one kid, 18-year-old at the time, was the one who killed Frank. He was a troublemaker, locally known troublemaker. And he was dead, though, by the time I got on the story. He had gone to prison on another offense and died in prison. So I was unable to interview him. But even as I got a profile of him, something struck me. I thought, this kid was a troublemaker, but he didn't strike me as a murderer. And I, as much as I was getting fed the line that it was Tommy, the one who killed Frank, I was like, nah, it doesn't sit well with me. There's something else going on here. I think there's someone else involved. So anyway, I was staying at this bed and breakfast. One night, these two women moved in across the hall from me. We struck up a conversation. We went out that night, had some drinks, and we're chatting. And one of the women says about her friend, "Oh, my friend here." is an energy reader. And I said, oh, okay. I'm not sure what that is. Well, is that like a psychic? No, it's not a psychic. I'm not a psychic. I read energy. And I said, okay. Well, and she had worked with some law enforcement organizations, including the FBI, to help solve some cases. And according to her friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so I, being the skeptic, that's interesting. Uh, so the next day we were at brunch, and I was just having a conversation with the owner of the bed and breakfast, and I said, she asked how my research was coming, and I said, I get the feeling that everybody in town thinks Tommy is the one who killed Frank. I don't think that. I think that someone else did, and I think he's still living here in town, and I think that people are protecting him. And Carol, this woman who was the energy reader, was sitting at the table, and she said, "You're right." And I said, "What do you mean I'm right?" And she said, "You're right. There isn't someone else. The killer is still living here in town." And I said, "How do you know this?" And she said, "I just know it." She said, "It was no accident that you and I met this weekend. We were brought together for a reason." I thought, okay. So I said, "Hey, I don't know what your deal is, but would you be willing to help me?" And she said, "Of course. That's why I'm here. I'm here to help you." So I said, "Okay, would you go with me to the scene of the crime?" And she agreed. So I, that afternoon, drove her about 25 miles north of where we were staying into the woods where they found Frank's body. And she recreated the entire murder scene for me in incredible detail. I mean, like crazy detail.
Mm-hmm.
People who were there, descriptions of them, conversations, possible names. She told me some of the thoughts that Frank was having. She told me about an argument that he had had with his brother before he left that she would not have known about. An argument also that he had with his mother that she would not have known about. There were a lot of details about Frank's family she wouldn't have known about. And I was kind of blown away, like, wow, I don't know what's going on, but this woman is pretty amazing. And she told me before we went in there, she said, "I know you're skeptical, but I'm going to make you a believer." And she did. And she and I are still friends to this day. In fact, I talked to her just the other day. Yeah.
I wanted to explore different aspects of that.
Yeah.
So when I was reading the book, like chapter 2, you kind of like explore Frank's departure from the town,
Mm-hmm.
and you really got into like Frank's motivations and the inner workings of what he was thinking about. Was the energy reading, because I know that she did the energy reading and astrological things of what was going on the day that he left. Was
Right.
that a part of where your insight was coming from, or where did that aspect come from?
So, yeah, the description of him leaving, a lot of that came from his siblings.
Okay.
Like they gave me some real insight to his what was going on in his head at the time. And so, yeah, as an author, when you write about something, a lot of that is conjecture, but it was kind of corroborated by what his siblings saw in him and what like this is what was going on with him, and this is likely how he was feeling. Now later, you're right. Carol did do some astrological things where, and she's got a kind of software system where she plugs in birth date and coordinates of where you're born and gets the astrological sightings. But she then said, "Wow, this kid was destined. There was so much going on that this was his time. He had to get out or he was going to explode." And he got out of town.
And there was a different part of the book where you really felt like you were communicating with Frank, and you got into the car, you're listening. The Grateful Dead is a continuing theme throughout the
Right.
book. Frank was a big fan, as you mentioned earlier. The title of the book, Ripple, is a Grateful Dead song.
Right.
And all of that, like, I'm a very skeptical person. I am a seminary dropout.
Gotcha.
And I've just, since that time, I've just become more and more skeptical and cynical.
Mm-hmm.
I try to be
Well,
not that way. So as I was reading it, like I was extremely skeptical, but trying to be open to it. And then when I closed today at 5, I needed to go across town to pick up, my dryer is broken. I need to pick up parts for that. So I'm like, you know what? I should probably listen to the Grateful Dead just to kind of like get into the right mindset. I have Apple Music, and I just said to my phone, "Hey Siri, play Grateful Dead." The very first song, and now my phone is probably going to start playing Grateful Dead. The very first song that popped up was Ripple, and I
Oh,
just
of
got
course.
chills. I won't say that I cried, but my eyes did get not
Wow.
insignificantly wet.
Wow. Wow. That's great.
Yeah, out of all the Grateful Dead songs that could have popped up,
Right.
um,
Wow.
yeah.
See? Okay.
So
That's great. I love
I
that
won't say I'm
story.
a believer, but I was
Well,
moved.
well, I love it. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Something was speaking to you. And I too. I mean, I was trained with healthy skepticism, and I think that's, that's okay and it's healthy. Um, I also think now I certainly am more open to things. Um, and yeah, there are a lot of people who have shown some skepticism now. Even and Carol is a fascinating woman and now a dear friend. And she talked about growing up with a gift that was not acceptable in her family and in some parts of her family.
Hmm.
But she is also a woman of she's a very strong Christian, and she will say, some people say, oh, this is the work of the devil, and she says, not the work of the devil. This is a gift. Like she said, just look in the Bible at all the different, the seers and the visionaries throughout, biblical history. It's just a gift, and so she really put it in a context for me that, well, besides kind of blowing my mind with
Hmm.
some of the accuracy, including identifying the killer in great detail. She has put it in a context for me to kind of accept it. And my mother was very similar. I think my mother also was kind of a visionary, and she was the one that suggested I talk to Frank when I was having so I described
Yeah.
this in the book. I just kind of hit this dry patch of frustration as a writer's we often hit, or anybody, any creative process, right? Um, and I was just at my wit's end, and she said, "Why don't you talk to Frank?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Just talk to him, ask him." I'm like, "Okay."
Hmm.
So I took her advice, and I spoke to Frank, and he spoke to me, and as strange, it hit me as strange as anything else, but it became clear as anything else too. But it was because I believe I was open to it, just like prayer and any other um, spiritual entity would speak to you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Even through my skepticism, I related to that part of the book. Um, it was 8 years ago now that my dad was in the hospital. Things were not looking great. It was just a very stressful time. I was in bed sleeping the one night, and I had this dream that I was left my bed, went downstairs, went down to the basement, came around the corner, and anytime you went to my grandparents' house, like you came around the corner and you would see my grandfather sitting in his chair, and he would turn around. He just had this very, very deep voice, and he would say, "Hello, Robert." And that, like, my grandfather was sitting in my basement,
Yeah.
turned, said that, and I just heard him, and just like it was so there that popped out of bed. I don't think I fell back asleep that night, but I can
Yeah.
relate to
So you had an
somebody.
experience.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
uh,
and really, I believe once you get in the habit of it or open to it, they'd happen more often.
and I always take notes, especially when I'm prepping for a book, inside of the book, um, that this really, as much as anything, became kind of a spiritual exploration for you. Do you feel
Yeah.
that like you had a lot of growth in that department?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll not a small part of it was my mother. So I moved back. So I was living in New Mexico at the time, writing for the paper. And I moved back to Kansas City to work on the story, and temporarily. And I anticipated only moving back for about 6 months. And I was staying with her, and she and I were at a very similar place in our spiritual growth, and we kind of embarked on some things together. And it was really cool to experience that with her and share that with her. And I learned a lot about her as well. So that was part of it, but also through this, just through this journey of death and grief, and a lot of regret, and in the McGonigle family, processing that with them, allowed me to kind of look at my own life and just kind of grow. And again, as I mentioned before, just, as my growth as a parent and as a husband, it's all tied together, and it's all tied, to that spiritual growth, as well as, emotional connectivity and emotional intelligence.
And attached to that, there was an aspect of the book that the writing project that I've been working on for a while, and have had multiple starts to it, is, I don't know how much it's going to be autobiographical. Right now, it's semi-autobiographical of my relationship with my dad, who was a drug addict. And one of the things that I was doing in prepping for writing that, and things that I wanted to incorporate it, was lines that were used in NA meetings. And I noticed that there was a couple of those lines that popped up in your book, of your mantra had become do the next right thing. And then there was another person in the book who said, let go and let God. And those are things that not only did I have like in my research, but like I had just heard my dad say and his friends say.
Right.
Is that coincidental, or like?
The let go and let God, I frankly don't remember who that was that said that in the book. If it was Frank's therapist, well, because one of the guys I spoke to who was fascinating was Frank's therapist. His family said, yeah, talk to him. He knew Frank in a different way than we did. And since Frank's gone, I think it's okay for you to talk to him. And he was great and very open. And so some of that may have come from him, but I don't know, for me, do the next best thing. I can't, that's been a mantra of mine for a long time. And honestly, don't even know where it might have come from. But certainly I have been through my life surrounded with people who have been part of 12-step programs, and maybe some of that kind of filtered in from them. But it's also, it's just, it's a good way, I think, to live life in general. So
Yes.
I still do a lot of spiritual reading and from different traditions.
This is kind of a side note, but attached to your experience with Carol, and you had multiple warnings from multiple people to be careful. Did you fully comprehend the danger that you could have been in dealing with characters that potentially could have killed the person that you were researching?
Right. Well, no, I don't think I fully understood if there had been any danger. I have never really been a person who has been afraid of things, and it's not a hubris or any kind of cocky self-confidence or anything like that. I think it's, frankly, I don't know. I consider it a gift. I don't worry a lot about much, and if I do, it doesn't last very long, which is a good trait as a father.
I'm the opposite. So
yeah,
I envy that aspect.
But so when I was there were moments that certainly were nerve-wracking for me, and I was like, I need to get out of this situation. Now, I never thought I wouldn't get out of the situations. There was one very intense moment that I describe in the book where I meet face to face the person that Carol said killed Frank. She described him in great detail, and a couple days after she did that, I met this guy, and as soon as I saw him, I knew this was the guy. And so we had a very, very unusual and relatively short conversation. And I extracted myself from there fairly quickly. But it was, and then my personality is, but I want to go back and talk to him again. I want to ask another question. I want to kind of, a lot of times I will kick myself afterwards. Like, oh, I should have said this, or I should have asked that, but want to dig deeper. And after that encounter, I called Carol, who had gone back home now. She had left the area where I was staying in Georgetown, and called her and told her what happened. And she said, honey, I don't think it's safe for you there. You better get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay. And by this point, I was all in with Carol. So if the energy reader in your life tells you that you need to leave town, I decided I better listen to her and leave town. But again, I left like, okay, it's, my time here is done. I don't know that I feared for my life, but it was time for me to get out of there. I had poked the hornet's nest a little bit, and in a small town that can be, I guess, potentially dangerous.
Yeah. It reminded me of an aspect when for my undergraduate degree, it was in television and film, and I focused in documentary filmmaking. And for my senior year, we had to pick a project that was going to be our capstone. That was going to be our project for the year. And just the summer before my freshman year, there was the pizza bomber case in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Which became a big thing. There's a Netflix documentary now, but at the time they had not caught the person. But I had reached out. I talked with the FBI agent who was in charge of the investigation, and he was not interested in doing an interview. So I'm like, if I don't have him, I don't have a project. And I'm probably fortunate because the woman who was guilty of it was just insane. And if I started poking the hornet's nest
right.
While she was out on the street, probably wouldn't have been great.
You never know. Things happen for a reason, and that's good.
Yes. So I was disappointed when I saw that the documentary I wanted to make became a huge hit on Netflix, but it was not meant to be. There's
another project for you in the hopper somewhere in the pipeline there.
And because I want to be mindful of your time, I don't want to rush on the stage.
I think we're good. Yeah.
I don't want to. It's a nonfiction book, so I'm not always as concerned about spoiling the end of the book. Yes. But did you, after all of this time, feel closure from the project? And was it the closure that you had expected when you were going into the project many years ago?
Closure for me is one of those slippery concepts to me. I honestly, I don't, if there's something I've come to is that I don't believe in closure.
Okay.
I don't believe that you could ever get closure, but I think you can arrive at varying degrees of peace with certain things. Because people often ask me, like with the McGonigle family, did this help them bring closure? Well, I think for many of the siblings, just going through the process and talking to me about it and being so open, they did arrive at varying degrees of peace with kind of what happened. All of them, every one of them kind of agree with what Carol saw in the woods. Like, that's exactly how we saw it going down. That's exactly how we thought it happened. So to have that kind of corroborated by her, I think made it a little bit more acceptable for them, I guess. But for me, it really, I did kind of go through, since I've lived this story so long, I am at a place of peace with it. But I, as I mentioned earlier, where I arrived and what helped me arrive there is this feeling of compassion. And I hope that I conveyed that. Some people have really picked up on it, and I've heard from several people. I've received a lot of emails over the past several weeks and texts from people who really appreciated that bit of compassion at the end. And that for me was really what kind of brought me to a place of equanimity and peace with this. And I like it. I like going through life with compassion, because it makes it a lot easier than going through of, wanting to blame somebody or wanting to, arrive at frontier justice for some wrong that we think has been done against us. I think I really am comfortable with this approach of compassion. So that's something that I would like to continue to explore.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think the important question is the nieces that urged you to continue to complete the story. Are they satisfied with the end?
Yes. One of them just got married 2 weeks ago too, and we talked about it at her wedding. Yes, they are, and in fact, I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast S Town.
Yes.
When S Town came out, I don't know, it's been four years ago or so, or 5 maybe by now. I don't lost track, but when that podcast came out, she said, "Uncle Jim," she called me, "you got to listen to this. This is your story. It's very similar to your story." And sure enough, it was. And so, yeah, I credit them, and they felt they were pleased that I credited them for getting me at least stoking me a bit to go and finish the book.
Nudged you along.
Yeah.
And then one thing that I always like to ask out of curiosity is, who are some of your favorite writers and writing inspiration?
Well, boy, it's been a long history of reading for me.
It's always tough. I wouldn't be able to answer the question very well. But
well, I was kind of weaned on interesting like Kurt Vonnegut and Steinbeck and I know they're but different. But there were aspects of that of their writings that I still kind of hold on to today. Another is the humorist Calvin Trillin, who still writes for the New Yorker, who's one of my all-time favorite just writers. In fact, he did a book about the time that I got back into Frank's story called Killings. And he went into small towns, and he would paint these bucolic pictures of all these little towns he was in, but then slowly things would unravel, and it was the local murder story for that town. And the way he did it was just fascinating to me. And so he still, I still really appreciate the way he writes. And, it's interesting you asked me this question, because I did some work for Hallmark Cards in Kansas City many years ago. And when I was brought in to kind of interview for this, it was a special job, but I was like brought on staff. But the woman interviewing me said, "What have you been reading lately?" And my kids were like 5 and 3 at the time. I said, "Well, we've been reading a lot of Amelia Bedelia. I've been reading a lot of, just whatever it was we were reading." Because pretty much when you're a dad at that time, that's all I was reading. Yeah. I wasn't doing much reading for myself. So
my kids are 1, 6, and 8. So
Excellent. And they might like some Mr. Sticky Feet music as well.
Yes, absolutely. I have been introducing them. Yes.
Okay, good.
Anything that you're reading now that you're excited about, to repeat your Hallmark interview question?
Yes. Well, I read, now I'm blanking on the name. Peace Like a River. Okay. It came out, and gosh, what's the guy's name? It came out 15 years ago, maybe, or longer now. I don't know, but it really was well done as a novel that I really appreciated. And then I'm reading a book by a friend of mine about the early days of baseball.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Is that published now?
It is. It is. Trying to think of. Well, his name is Pat O'Neill. And it is about Ted I'm blanking on his name now. See, I put on the spot.
I'll
Anyway,
look it
this
up.
guy, the Barnacle of Baseball, is this
Okay.
subtitle. The Barnacle of Baseball. This guy is credited as an Irish immigrant, credited for really getting baseball up and running in the United States, and he was a character, crazy, all kinds of crazy stories about this guy.
I think I
Ted
recently
Sullivan.
special ordered that for a customer.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Ted Sullivan, the Barnacle of Baseball. That's his name, Ted Sullivan.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
and my dear friend Joe Posnanski, speaking of baseball, oh my gosh, he wrote one of my favorite baseball books, The Soul of Baseball, about our Kansas City Monarchs and baseball history in Kansas City with Buck O'Neill, who was one of the original Negro Leagues players. Yeah.
If you ever want to learn about baseball in my community, there's a book called Our Team, and it's from I can't think of the original name of the team, but now they're called the Tarp Skunks. So
Ooh, all right.
if you're a baseball
Like the name.
fan, that might be. But thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add tonight?
Well, I could talk about this forever. That's
I know.
for sure. Could go on and on. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to kick it around, and I look forward to someday being in your neck of the woods.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
So for everyone watching, we have Ripple, A Long Strange Search for a Killer by Jim Cosgrove in the store right now. If you are not from our area, you can still get it through our website, goodneighborbooks.com, or pop into your local bookstore and encourage them to put it in stock. We have a few events coming up, but I'll just touch on the next two. We'll be talking to Matthew Cordell 2 weeks from today. He is the author of Hello Neighbor and a lot of other children's books. He's an author and illustrator. So we'll be talking about his journey of telling the story of Mr. Rogers for a very young audience. And then on June 2nd, we'll be talking to Christopher Finan, How Free Speech Saved Democracy. This is obviously a very timely conversation for many things, but Christopher has done a lot of work specifically in the world of bookstores and libraries and how free speech has impacted that. And that's been an ongoing conversation and debate within our industry. So right. I look forward to both of those events.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Same publisher.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, same team. Thanks again, Jim, for this. Have fun with your performance tonight. And thanks everyone for watching tonight.
Take care.
You too.